Hey everybody, Aaron Mack, back once again. We're gonna keep reading. I think this book is like so interesting, and they're gonna get more so like the further we get into this. But I just had to lay some groundwork about these J's, bro. And this think tank is a Schminus think tank. This Tavistock. So just in case you didn't know. Now I left off in a weird spot and I am trying to figure out where we left off. So I think that I'm going to pick up. We're still in the counterinsurgency chapter. So I think I'm going to start. Let's see. I mean, I obviously turned the page. Okay, so I'm just going to start at the first sentence on the first page. I mean, on this next page that I turned. Even though I'm pretty sure I read like to the bottom of the paragraph. Also, just so I can say it, this is for fair use for the purposes of commentary and education. Okay? All right, let's go. So, in other words, the Institute looked for methods by which to manage populations by exploiting their ideology. By first creating numerous social groups and then setting such groups into competition and making all gains contingent on winning these at the expense of the contingency groups, a self-policing fascist social order could be established. It was merely necessary to atomize the subject population, employing an, quote, armamentarium of sociological and psychiatric weaponry to the effect of so dividing the people against itself, end quote. And I've spoken about that before, just the divide and conquer tactic that's being set upon us through the media, through, education, like literally everywhere you turn, some people group is being turned against some other people group. It's crazy. And then within each sub people group, it's like they're fostering these crazy ideas. And so everyone is literally brainwashed. It's absolutely bananas. NT ways. Okay. Yeah, so dividing against the people against itself. Setting race against race. Language group against language group. Women's self-interest against men as, quote, oppressors. Further subdivide them by professional category and so on, and to further subdivide them into small territorial community, quote, self-interest groups that the military forces are, quote, never confronted with more than a small material force represented by a hardcore resistant to a generally effective combination of sociological and psychiatric weapons of control, end quote. One of the ways in which such practices were encouraged and used by Tavistock brainwashers involved increasing levels of productivity and the intensification of labor at the expense of one's health. Okay, I think we did read about this, but I'm still going to reiterate it. Can't hurt to read it twice. In other words, Rockefeller, okay, we know who that is, induced self-motivated destruction of the self, a society of brainwashed zombies content to subsist on the brink of starvation, performing sadomasochistic acts of sodomy for a perceptibility irrational sort of psychotic holocaust. All of it is based on a sort of perverse Dionysian, sodomic, mindless fanaticism within the broader framework of Rees's Rockefeller model of fascist society. Quote, the purpose is to function under a spiraling reduction in standard income and working conditions, end quote. And that is where we find ourselves today. There is a method to this madness, however. For example, in an environment of downward spiraling standard income and working conditions, higher and higher productivity is, quote, suggested as the group's goal, often at the expense of safety and the physiological well-being of the group members. Anyone who protests is told that they are maladjusted. Quote, the idea was to recreate a family dynamic or a dynamic of peer pressure in group therapy where predetermined objectives were forced onto the group through consensus or, quote, democracy in the language of these social engineers. The idea was that by attacking someone's sovereign identity in the group, that individual would forfeit their sovereignty to the group and become suggestible to the predetermined objectives, end quote. Such techniques play upon the, quote, vulnerable person's guilt, shame, and regret with both sledgehammer and scalpel, end quote. Humiliated by the group, with only the unreal realm to judge from, the individual further degrades himself and accepts the verdict. He begins producing more. This is the malicious, disgusting kernel of co-participation, quote, quality of life, end quote, co-determination, quote, humanization, end quote, human relations, or whatever other euphemism may be mustered, all under the banner of, quote, post-industrial society, end quote, a Ford Foundation-sponsored piece of garbage whose particular point as a counterinsurgency weapon of ideology introduced the proto-fascist notion of zero growth, end quote. You hear Bill Gates talk about it all the damn time. In fact, the idea for these programs came long before Tavistock was established. John D. Rockefeller Jr. began to push the savage, quote, human relations plans as the best way to get more productivity in 1916 when he spoke at the YMCA Industrial Conference, and then again in 1917 during his speech at Cornell University Founders Day Convention. One of the key proposals coming from the Rockefeller camp was to push, quote, a democratic employee stock ownership plan because, quote, it makes the worker a capitalist in his viewpoint, and this renders him a conservative and immune from radical ideals, end quote, and produces greater productivity, which is the aim. The 1940s was the turning point for the Rockefeller strategy of behavior modification, brainwashing, co-determination, co-participation, corporativism for the takeover of the United States and world labor movement. As war wound down, Rockefeller changed the psychology of the workers in ways essential to the way he would rule the U.S. organized labor movement from then on. This was done simultaneously on several levels. In 1946, Reese Tavistock Rockefeller was formalized in the Rockefeller Memorandum, in which Brigadier General John Rawlings Reese exposed the full depth of his, quote, cabal and offered it to the family. The Rockefeller Foundation, which had been heavily funding Tavistock and Tavistock members since 1934, readily accepted, and the Tavistock Clinic was transformed into the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, end quote. The Institute developed national and international operations under the heading, quote, Operation Research, end quote. Firstly, Rockefeller took many of the social scientists who had been involved in the bestial fascist war intelligence services and set them upon campuses and labor institutes funded with Rockefeller Foundation, National Institute of Mental Health, Army, Navy, Air Force, and large capitalist firm money, guidance, and projects. These labor institutes were created at the same time as the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the National Security Council as part of the same network that Rockefeller was building to rule the world, once the United States had replaced Britain after the war as the world's strongest power. One of the key Tavistock projects was Rockefeller-sponsored Labor Institute, where behavior modification, inter-group motivation, team working, social dynamics, productivity increasing were all studied from the psychological point of view to manipulate the great unwashed. And think of the universities and all the brainwashing that has gone to the unwashed, which I find like a double ironic because these people are, whether it be religious or mystical or crypto, they are Jays. The Rockefellers are, obviously, duh. As are the Rothschilds. And so, they are of the same ilk, and they have been working for a very long time to subvert white Christian culture. Anyway, one of the key Tavistock projects was Rockefeller-sponsored Labor Institute. Oh, okay, I already read that. By the early 1950s, Rockefeller had a network of labor institutes plus control of the Department of Labor to physically and psychologically control from top down the United States labor movement. But Rockefeller's greatest contribution to the, quote, labor cause has been the complete destruction of the labor movement, its perversion and control through Rockefeller Tavistock orchestrated operations. From Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, to Works Progress Administration to the WPA, from National Civic Federation, the NCF, and American Federation of Labor, the AFL, were labor movements in the United States always firmly under the control of the Rockefeller financial interest. For example, Samuel Gompers, the AFL's first president, helped form in the early 1900s the National Civic Federation. Quote, it believed in the supremacy of employers and the benevolence of capitalism and helped break strikes, recruit vigilantes, and conduct attacks against working class. During the First World War, Gompers championed the vicious War Labor Board that crushed labor. Among the NCF's leaders were Mark Hanna of the U.S. Steel Corporation and such Rockefeller followers as Charlie Elliott, member of the Board of Trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation and president of Harvard, end quote. Another of the Rockefeller organizations was Steelworkers Organizing Committee, whose director was Philip Murray. Murray's right-hand man was Clinton Golden, who in 1947 joined the editorial board of Tavistock's Human Relations magazine, and in the mid-1950s became a member of the Rockefeller-controlled Ford Foundation. Yet another Rockefeller front was Cornell ILR School created coalition of labor union women, which held its first conference in Chicago in 1974. Gotta love feminism. The group was intended to push affirmative action for women, pitting men against women in vicious job fights with millions being laid off. And why women, I mean, we've all seen the memes of like the women that have gone and built the bridge that fell down, and these did this DEI hire woman air traffic controller like totally caused an epic plane crash. I mean, just these diversity hires and this, what's it called? Quote, affirmative action is a scourge on the country. If a straight white man is the best person for the job, then that's who I want to do the job. I don't give a F if how many women lose a job. It should be based on merit and who is the best at the job. Not like, well, we have to have 20 women, in this position. Why? Are they better at the job? I mean, it's so stupid. Anyways. Okay, the group was intended to push affirmative action for women, pitting men against women in vicious job fights with millions being laid off. Quote, the three Rockefeller formed and funded and directed labor institutes, Tavistock, the ISR, and Cornell ILR, are the only three of the more than 200 to 300 that were started by the Rockefellers throughout the world after the Second World War, which was caused by the Jays. They include the Centre d'études des problèmes humains de travail and the Association pour la recherche et l'intervention psychosociologique in France. I am not a good French speaker. The Industrial Research Institute in Bonn, Germany, and the DGB's German Trade Union, Department of Social Relations Institute. Also in Germany, La Sociedad Argentina de Investigación Operativa, or SADIO, and the International JS Research Foundation on Human Relations in Yasharel, because it had just become a new country. How about that? How timely that all of this shit started happening right around then. All of this is Kabbalistic, satanic, witchcraft, Kabbalah, Jayish mysticism. It's all because of their belief that they are, superior to the rest of us. So they're trying to create this world where we are their slaves. I mean, to put it in simple, plain terms, that's what we're dealing with here. And the Psychological Institute at Kyushu in Japan, to name a few. See, I always wondered, I was like, there's no way that, communist China obviously has adopted some, whether it's through the whole Jayish thing or they just adopted the communist ideal from the Jays. But I always wondered about places like Japan, but I guess nowhere is safe. The list of Rockefeller influence is enormous. Quote, between the Rockefeller family's longstanding control over the American Medical Association, which they have prevented people from being cured of thousands of illnesses at this point. They have ran people out of the country that were healing people. Royal Rife comes to mind. Who was this other guy that was using some kind of plant? I don't know. That a lot of people have been run out of the United States to Mexico to treat very sick people, that they've had much more success than regular allopathic Western Rockefeller funded medicine. But they have their groups, like the American Medical Association, run them out of the country. Lawsuits, sue the crap out of them. I mean, these people are nasty. They have taken over literally every aspect of our entire lives, and they are controlling us, and we are now slaves. These are just facts, people, okay? And if you think otherwise, then you might be brainwashed by them. I'm trying to help wake you up here. Okay. Yeah, so the Rockefeller had a long-standing control over the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association, and the encroachment of the CIA establishment into all branches of government. Various governmental, including military funds, were used to push the development of brainwashing and to plant Rockefeller Tavistock proteges in key positions and institutions. For example, B.F. Skinner's position at Harvard was established in this way. Another Reese student, Dr. Kenneth Clark, moved into Rockefeller's New York State Board of Regents and also into the key black counterinsurgency post, the MARC of the Rockefeller-inspired and Rockefeller-controlled Ford Foundation. Dr. Nathan S. Klein, one of the worst Reesian criminals, headed New York State's Rockland State Hospital, as well as held a key position in New York's Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where a broad and old tradition of brainwashing thrived. And I bet they did some serious experiments, allegedly. I mean, God, that sounds like hell. Okay, in fact, the techniques used in labor negotiations in Spain, France, Germany, the United States, and most other Western countries come straight out of Tavistock role-playing manual. And we know that they love to do this role-playing shit. Don't you remember, right before the Corona apocalypse, this pretend event 201, if you are a quote-unquote truther, or you are someone who is halfway awake and pays attention, you watch any amount of alternative media, that you would be aware that they were doing a role-playing exercise called Event 201 about a quote-unquote pandemic, okay? And that's why I called it pandemic and scandemic from day one, because they literally, I was watching them run drills on doing this quote-unquote pandemic, and then immediately here come, like a couple of weeks later, comes all this COVID crap. Everything is scripted, you guys, and it's scripted through these people. They control everything you think, literally everything. They control everything. Everything down to the toothpaste you use, the clothes you wear, the music you listen to, everything. Okay. Or perhaps, let's see. Or perhaps with a wink and a nod, they already do. Is that why the Spanish labor movement is a bad joke? Let's have a look. Quote, first, even before a strike union is thoroughly surveyed, Rockefeller labor institutes do psychological profiles on the union as a whole, collecting information on it through students who are sent out with questionnaire, by counseling done on union members, by intensive questioning of union leaders, by attending a set-up discussion sessions of union members and attending union meetings, by evaluating the union's past history, such as its tendency to strike, for example, and by going over written tests and records of personal histories of a significant number of individual members. Studies are done on racial and ethnic subsections of the Union. For every subsection, such as Italians, for example, it is recorded whether they are from middle income, lower working class, newly immigrated, perhaps without citizenship papers, deeply religious, for a long time from a certain neighborhood, very attached to one's mother, and so forth. Then the union and subsections are evaluated for how they react under crisis situations, the pitiable psychological weaknesses, the neurotic guilts, the sort of horrifying images that produce fears in members, which will then be played in the media. All they're doing is psyoping. They're psyoping everything. That's what I've been saying. They're psyoping the Bible right now. Like legit, everything is a psyop, guys. Everything on the news, the sports are scripted. They know who's going to win beforehand. Like nothing is real. The Matrix was a documentary, okay? Know that. The movie, The Matrix, okay? And I'm sure some of y'all have seen it. Most of y'all have seen it, I'm sure. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Okay. Horrifying images that produce fears in members, which will then be played on in the media and subtly exploited on unconscious levels in the government and other Rockefeller propaganda, such as the known fear of white middle-income teachers of attack from black gang youth, the points at which members crack under stress, the methods to make them hysterically panic, at what point members will stop trusting each other, their intimidation by violence, what vicious outside pressure will make them cave in, and so on. As many as 100 or 200 studies on every union are done by Rockefeller Labor Institute, end quote. Wow. The methodology employed comes straight out of a behavior theory of labor negotiations written by Walton and McKenzie for the Rockefeller-created Cornell School of Industrial Relations. That might be a book we might want to get and read. Remember, behavior theory of labor negotiations. Behavior theory. Okay, I'm going to have to remember that. The first step. The union is provoked by a particularly low, insulting contract offered. The furious union comes out en masse to picket lines. Clenched fists and determined stern faces are everywhere. Rockefeller waits out the first few days. By the afternoon of the third day, the union leader is spending most of his time in the union hall chatting with his friends. By the afternoon of the fourth day, the shouts are not half as energetic and few, if any faces hold the stern, determined look of the first morning. Tavistock enters the scene. The strike is to be crushed in stages. Quote, the union leadership is called into negotiations. Complete psychological profiles have been done on the personality structure, etc., of the union leaders. In meetings structured like a group therapy session unknown to the union leaders, the behavioral modifier arbiter conducts psychological probes against the union leaders. Most union leaders are Schleimiels, which seems like a fucking Yiddish word. Schleimiels. If that ain't Yiddish, I don't know what is. I don't even know what that means. And can be easily manipulated. The negotiators and the capitalists know that the pressure of immediate attacks, the tensions of the strike, the pressure from the rank and file, and the expiring strike fund are operating on the leaders, making them internally wrecked. Quote, then the leader is brought in for further negotiations. At this point, they are close to begging for anything to take back to the membership. End quote. But instead of better conditions for the workers, the union leaders are shown the techniques to sell it to the membership so that they won't think that they are being cheated. How was it done? The union leaders and the shop stewards are given a course on negotiations at the nearby Labor Institute. Here, behavior modification is performed. Guess who runs the seminars? You guessed it. Loyal Rockefeller psychologists and their staff members. However, the union penetration and eventual takeover doesn't end there. Key agents, behavior modifiers, are placed into union positions, usually in the posts of educational secretary and attorney. These attorneys, y'all out here, you think they're working for you, bro? They do not work for us. They work for the other side, okay? Trust. Okay, quote, by the next contract negotiation session, the union leaders are more easily malleable and will often agree to contracts and pre-contract negotiation therapy sessions. Furthermore, attention is simultaneously turned to the membership. Psychological warfare techniques such as cooling off periods between negotiations, smear campaign in the media, offers of reconciliation are used and are objective forces Rockefeller has at his disposal to break the remaining will of the strikers to crush them, end quote. Oh, wow. Okay, now we have a new little section. It's called Wartime Development of Brainwashing. I know it's backwards, but whatever. In practical terms, Rockefeller and Tavistock technocrats used their knowledge to break and then control a powerful coal miners' union, who, according to their own propaganda, quote, occupied a position of unquestioned leadership in the history of American labor, end quote. The project director was a Rockefeller man, Eric Trist. Trist had written Social Structure and Psychological Stress in Stress and Psychiatric Disorder, a piece of trash to be used in strikes and riots. Wow. With the post-war economy on a downslide and tensions among the trade unions running high, an alternative was devised. Trist suggested that workers be appointed to the board of directors of major companies. What was thought at the time to have been a major victory for labor turned out to be a brilliantly schemed plan of the Tavistock Institute. Quote, the profitability of the company, whether it stays afloat and the worker has a job, rests on outside world economic developments and internal affairs. The outside matters, such as the global markets, are directed generally by commodity cartels, control of money, raw materials, and so on. The inside affairs, unless there is investment and technological improvements, rest almost exclusively on the brutal speed up workers will subject themselves to at the expense of fatal accidents and death. Sounds like, what is that? Oh, dang it. Dang it. I just got a notification. I totally lost my train of thought. Anyways, okay. Oh, yeah, it's like one of the places, I don't know if it was Amazon or maybe FedEx. I can't remember what company, so don't, this is alleged, but I do know that workers that work like assembly lines that are like processing packages and stuff, like there have been unalivings due to them just making the times that they have to get everything processed by. They're like they're allowed, like, I don't know, 45 seconds or something for bathroom breaks. Just crazy crap. And I heard this story of somebody literally falling somehow down into the assembly line and got caught up and it mangled and died. And literally all of the workers couldn't stop working. Their bosses are screaming at them to keep working. And this person lays on the ground. They're like, nobody can help until the ambulance gets here. Anyway, they would not let anyone help them. Yeah, this kind of stuff is going on. So that's just wild. But, pretty soon they're not going to need us anymore. They're going to have their little robots to do all of this mail sorting and package sorting and heavy lifting and all that stuff. So I don't think a robot would ever be able to do my job as good as I can do my job. Nobody wants to talk to a robot. Thank God. Anyways, the operation to place workers on the board of directors meant tying workers to murderous speed-ups to ensure profitability. This came about by inducing workers to internalize this need, creating a whip in their minds, and disarming other workers by pressure from their mates. In a depression, such schemes consummate in frantic, anxiety-ridden compulsion amongst workers. End quote. The Marshall Plan. Okay. The Marshall Plan. The Rockefeller plans for post-war Europe were already being shaped during the Second World War. Yeah, we know. These Jays have been busy planning all kind of stuff for us. Goy out here. In 1946, Tavistock would become an important ally in the Rockefeller fight to take over labor unions around the world. Okay, so not just the West, but around the world. I mean, this is deeper than I even realized, bro. Like A lot of these books, like I said, I've thumbed through them and I've read, but like we're learning a lot of this together, and this is just absolutely freaking insane to me. Okay. One of the key events that shaped that fight was the Marshall Plan, named for the speech on June 5th, 1947, very closely to the same time that Yasharel was established, invented, whatever, not too long before, by former General and then U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall, who proposed a solution to the disintegrating economic and social conditions that faced Europeans in the aftermath of World War II. Under the program, the United States would provide, quote, aid to prevent starvation in the major war areas, repair the devastation of those areas as quickly as possible, and invite European countries to join in a cooperative plan for economic reconstruction, end quote. What is less generally acknowledged is that the, quote, plan came with strings attached. Yeah. America made explicit requirements for trade liberalization and increases in productivity, thus, quote, ensuring the Americanization of Europe as European political and economic elites became wedded to their American counterparts, with no significant economic or political development taking place without U.S. approval, end quote. And by U.S., they mean Schmeinist bought U.S. politicians. Let's read between the lines here. Come on. These plans don't just pop up out of nowhere. Okay, these are like very thoughtfully put together over centuries and centuries of, okay, this stuff did not just like happen in a vacuum. It's all the same freaking Schmeienist people, whether they be doing this themselves or whether they be indoctrinating other people to do it for them, because that's what they do, or whether they're just outright paying people, because I do know that wasn't the Strait of Hormuz built by like Rothschild? Isn't that what it said in one of the books that I read? I can't remember. I'm pretty sure. Anyways. Okay, what is less? Okay, is that the plan? Okay, blah, 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 blah. Economic, political taking place without the U.S. Okay, between the years of 1948 and 1951, when the Marshall Plan was formally in operation, which is coincidentally when Yasharel became a country, 1948, Congress appropriated $13.3 billion in aid to 16 Western European states. This credit was used to buy up European industry and the European working class extremely cheaply. As Mike Peters writes, end quote, Bilderberg Group and the Project of European Unification, end quote. Quote, this unprecedented exercise of international generosity, dubbed by Churchill as the most sordid act in history, deserved direct economic purposes, not deserved, but served direct economic purposes for the internationally oriented U.S. corporations which promoted it, end quote. Who owns those U.S. corporations? Kai Bird described the hidden aspects of the plan in his book, The Color of Truth, on the Bundy brothers. In 1949, quote, McGeorge Bundy, former Ford Foundation president, took on a project with the Council on Foreign Relations to study Marshall Plan aid to Europe. The Council's study group included some of the foreign policy establishment's leading figures. Working with young Bundy were Allen Dulles, the future CIA director, Dwight Eisenhower, the future U.S. president, George Kennan, a key ideologue of the Cold War, and Richard M. Bissell and Franklin A. Lindsay. Dulles, Bissell, and Lindsay would shortly become high-ranking officials of the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency. Their meetings were considered so sensitive that the usual off-the-record transcript was not distributed to council members. There was good reason for the secrecy. Participants were privy to the highly classified fact that there was a covert side to the Marshall Plan. Specifically, the CIA was tapping into the $200 million in a year in local currency counterpart funds contributed by the recipients of the Marshall Plan aid. These unvouchered monies were being used by the CIA to finance anti-communist electoral activities in France and Italy, and to support sympathetic journalists, labor unions, leaders, and politicians, end quote. On the one hand, the origins of the Marshall Plan are in fact to be found in the policy formation networks around the Rockefeller circles in 1942. Quote, key Rockefeller figures included Paul Hoffman, president of Studebaker Company. Hoffman was the leading economist for a Committee for Economic Development, one of the Rockefeller-controlled organizations. The CED devised some of the essential work for the Marshall Plan to loot Europe. And that's what these fucking Jays have been doing this whole time. And that's what I was going to say when it started bringing up the money. This is just a cash grab. That's all it is. You know, it's like, oh, well, we're going to get all this money together to help rebuild, and then nothing ever gets rebuilt, and all these people just end up rich as fuck. So the Marshall Plan was to loot Europe, which, you know, now America has been looted, and so have a plethora of other countries. They've almost got us right where they want us, bro. Like, we're almost at a point where they don't even need us anymore. I mean, that's just wild. Before this outright takeover began in 1947, Now, this book is not putting this together, but I am. I just find it very interesting, right? That the formation of a new Schmionist geopolitical nation state was being formed around this time, or in 1947, it was being sold by Zionists to the rank and file of British whoever, okay? So this is very weird and very timely that this cash grab and this looting of Britain was happening right after World War II and right when all these Jays would have needed all this money to build their country. Isn't that weird? I find that very interesting. Anyway, all right, let's see. Before this outright takeover began in 1947, a torturous psychological softening up was conducted against the European working class, including near starvation. In Germany, daily per capita consumption of calories fell to 1,300. Furthermore, the American military government that was occupying the U.S. zone cut off the supply of home heating fuel by diverting coal away from Germany. A systematic terror campaign began, with Rhesian-trained death squads roaming Germany and murdering people. Part of the same operation was the selection procedure conducted by Rhesian psychologists to weed out the most loyal and true to the Tavistock Creed as the future rulers of Europe. Workers rendered desperate, capitalists starved for credits, rulers already chosen. The Marshall Plan machine for reconstruction that is outright looting began in 1948. Nothing's coincidence. Nothing. Quote, to guarantee that no trouble would come from the labor movement, the intelligence services, the CIA, and the State Department, along with Tavistock Institute, gathered key unionists to carry out the Rockefeller plan of reshaping and taking control over a section of European labor movement, end quote. These key unionists were heavily recruited from the National Labor Relations Board, a Rockefeller corporatist brainchild run by his loyal lapdog, Arthur Goldberg. Quote, Goldberg was working with the Social Democrats within the European labor movement. He was funneling OSS, which is a CIA precursor, funds into the Social Democratic wing of the clandestine French Federation of Labor, preparing arrangements that would help U.S. intelligence take over the French movement after the war, end quote. On the other hand, the movement to form a united Europe was part of a larger plan to form a world government. The Hague Congress, held in May 1948, quote, called for a united Europe and issued 7 resolutions on aspects of political union. Number 7 stated, the creation of a united Europe must be regarded as an essential step towards the creation of a united world. This is all communist propaganda, bullshit, Bolshevik ideology. The Marshall Plan, aside from helping put Europe back on its feet, led to the Schuman Plan in 1950 when the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman, interesting name, proposed that the entire coal and steel production of both France and Germany be placed under the authority of one supranational body, end quote, which in turn led to the European Coal and Steel Community, then to Euratom, the European Atomic Energy Community, and ultimately to the common market. So they don't have elected officials anymore. They've got bureaucrats running everything. These people have no say over their lives at all anymore. Okay. ECSC was the first concrete step toward political unification, the first block of empire building, the empire being the One World Company Limited. With the signing of the Treaty of Rome paving the way for the European Economic Community in 1957, the next step towards a future world company limited was taken. Wow. What I have described in this chapter as horrendous and unbelievable as it may seem is no myth. It is a hideous reality of the everyday encroachment of fascism with a democratic face upon our society, devised at Tavistock Institute with financial help from the Rockefeller family going back over 100 years to the beginning of the 20th century. This, quote, reality, which if faced as reality and not a figment of one's overzealous imagination, can be wiped off the face of the earth. However, if that reality is not dealt with up front, then within a relatively short period of time, everything else we do as people, every hope we have for a better world, will come crashing down into a dustbin we call history. It is the Tavistock Institute or us, the people. There are no other alternatives. And then, wow, he has cited all his sources at the end of that chapter. That's pretty impressive. I didn't even wait to get to the end of the book. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to upload this part, and I think this will be part 3, and then we'll start on chapter 2, which is called Tavistock and the Unholy Alliance. Anyways, I hope that y'all are with me here and that people really do want to learn. I mean, I get it. Some people don't want to read books. I'll read them for you. In fact, if you've made it this far into the video and there are things that you're interested in, let me know that are in this realm of like, who are we slaves to? Who are our slave masters? Things about like Western medicine. I mean, literally, y'all, I legit have books about every freaking thing. Don't forget I have my little Fauci book, and I got another book about Western medicine, which I had another copy of, and I lost it, and now it seems as though I have lost it again. Dude, I don't know what my deal is. Like, I buy books and then leave them sitting around. I'll find it. Anyways, it's about disease and everything, how everything we've been taught about that is wrong. So basically here on this channel, we're just challenging the narrative that we've been told, because for the most part, it's all bullshit. And that's my job, to detect bullshit. So I hope everyone is blessed. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day, whatever time of day that you find yourself watching this. Mwah. God bless you.